Hi everyone, this is Maria Khan. Hope you're all doing well. In today's video, I'm going to talk about the PMBOK 7th edition. If you haven't read the book yet and you're planning to do that, then this video is for you. Now, PMBOK 7th edition basically focuses on delivering outcomes, no matter what approach is being used by the project teams. Whether you're using a predictive approach or you're using an adaptive approach, the focus here is on delivering outcomes and producing value for your organization. Now, this version of the book is very different from the input, tools and techniques, and output format of the previous version, and provides a very different perspective about different aspects of project management. Here, there's a shift from a process-based standard to the one based on principles. And it focuses on activities that are very critical for effective delivery of project outcomes. Now, this book is designed in such a way that it has two parts. The first part is about the standard for project management, which talks about what project management is and how it enables the intended project outcomes. It also talks about how projects operate within a system to deliver value for the organization and the stakeholders. It talks about how portfolios, programs, and projects form a system to deliver value for the organization. The governance structure and the internal and external factors that affect the project are also discussed in detail within this part of the book. And then there's another section that talks about different functions associated with projects and how people within these different functions, they provide support, guidance, and feedback in delivering value for the organization and stakeholders. Now, there could be people in your organization, for example, who are responsible for coordinating tasks. And then there could be people who are responsible for providing feedback for your projects. And there could be people who are there to provide expert opinion for your projects. Or there could be people who hold strategic positions within your projects. So all these different people in their own capacities, they contribute in delivering value for your projects and the organization. And how they do that is discussed in detail within this part of the book. And then there's another section that talks about different principles of project management, which define the kind of behavior that project teams need to adopt while they're managing their different tasks. And then there are different principles discussed, which include, for instance, being a diligent and respectful member of the project teams, creating a collaborative team environment for the projects, effective engagement with stakeholders, creating value for your organization, demonstrating effective leadership throughout the project. And then we have quality concerns while you're executing different processes for your project. And then we have another principle that talks about optimizing risk responses for your project so that you're better able to manage risks while you're executing the project. And then we have embracing adaptability and change to achieve the desired state for your project. So all these principles discussed in this section, they basically provide, they define the kind of behavior that project teams need to adopt so that they are better able to manage their projects and activities. And then the activities are discussed in detail within the next section of this book. And then the next part of the book is about the Guide to Project Management Body of Knowledge, which has 3 sections. The first section is about the project performance domains, which identifies 8 performance domains that together form an integrated system that enable project teams to deliver the intended project outcomes. And then the second section is about tailoring, which identifies what tailoring is, and it gives an overview about what to tailor and how to go about tailoring your individual projects. And then the third section is about commonly used models, methods, and artifacts that project practitioners can use while they're managing their project activities. Now, let's get to know each of these sections a little bit more. The first section, which is about project performance domains, has 8 sections, 8 performance domains. where the first performance domain is about stakeholder performance domain. Now, stakeholder performance domain is basically similar to the stakeholder management knowledge area of the previous version of the book. And the steps involved in managing and engaging the stakeholders are also similar to what we discussed in the previous version, where you first identify your stakeholders, then you understand them and analyze them using the power, influence, beliefs, values, and other factors. And then you prioritize them accordingly. And then you communicate with them using the required communication skills. And then you monitor them throughout the project as changes may occur while you're executing your projects. Then there is another domain that talks about team performance domain. This domain is very similar to the team development and management processes of the resource management knowledge area of the previous version of the book. But here, there's an added focus on activities and functions associated with people who are responsible for producing the desired project results. So there's a whole domain that is focused on team performance, which talks about people who are responsible for producing results. It also focuses on establishing a culture that enable individuals to evolve into high-performing teams. And then this domain also talks about different leadership styles, including centralized and distributed management and leadership, where in centralized management and leadership, the accountability is usually assigned to one individual. On the other hand, the distributed management and leadership is a servant leadership style, where the responsibility is shared among the team members. For instance, in situations where a project team may self-organize to complete a project, and someone within the team may serve as a facilitator to enable communication, coordination, and engagement. And this role may shift among different team members. Then this domain also talks about establishing a culture where there's a greater emphasis on transparency, integrity, respect, support, courage, and celebrating success. And then the next performance domain is about the development approaches and life cycle performance domain, which talks about predictive, iterative, incremental, and adaptive approaches that were discussed in the previous version of the book as well. But here you will get more information about agile or adaptive approach, since there's high level of focus on management of projects in agile way. This domain also talks about different variables to consider when you select your development approaches. For example, if the scope is well understood, the requirements are well known, and scope is unlikely to change, then you may select a predictive approach. But for deliverables that have high degree of innovation, requirements are uncertain, and the scope is likely to have many changes, and the project team does not have much experience, then in that scenario, you may choose an adaptive approach. And then we have the planning performance domain. This performance domain emphasizes that the amount of time spent on planning should be determined by the circumstances. It says that it is inefficient to spend more time planning than is needed, and that the information gained from planning should be sufficient to move forward in an appropriate manner, but not more detailed than necessary. For example, if your project is following a predictive approach, then you may follow the same planning processes that were discussed in the previous version, where you first identify the scope for your project using WBS technique, and then the cost and schedule estimations are done. On the other hand, in adaptive approaches, the concept of progressive elaboration and incremental planning are emphasized, where the project team may first establish the time and cost for the project, and then the scope is taken up as per the available time and budget. Although these concepts of agile were touched upon in the previous version of the book as well, but the 7th edition discusses these concepts in more detail. And when talking about scheduling the project, the book gives both the scenarios, where on one hand, if the project is following a predictive approach, then a stepwise process is followed where you first decompose the scope into specific activities, then you sequence related activities, then you estimate effort, duration, people, and resources required to complete the activities. And then you assign people and resources to the activities based on their availability. And then you adjust sequence, estimates, and resources until an agreed upon schedule is achieved. On the other hand, this domain also discusses the scheduling approach that will be followed if adaptive approach is used by the project. Now, adaptive schedule planning uses incremental planning, which is based on iterations and releases, where a high-level release plan is developed that contains basic functions and features to be included in each release. And within each release, there will be 2 or more iterations. And at the end of each iteration, some value or functionality is delivered by the project. So the planning for initial release is done in detail, whereas planning for the later releases is kept at a high level so that project team does not get involved in planning that could change based on the feedback received from earlier releases. Then we have the work performance domain. This domain talks about the activities and functions associated with establishing project processes, managing physical resources, and fostering a learning environment. The objective here is to achieve efficient and effective project performance. It also talks about balancing competing constraints of time, cost, scope, and other project constraints while maintaining stakeholder satisfaction. The importance of managing communications, physical resources, and procurements are also discussed in detail in this domain. It also talks about knowledge management and the concepts of explicit and tacit knowledge in detail. And then we have the delivery performance domain that focuses on meeting requirements, scope, and quality expectations to produce project deliverables that will drive the intended project outcomes. It talks about how projects generate value for the organization. For example, projects that use adaptive approach support releasing deliverables throughout the project lifecycle and start delivering value for the business, customers, and stakeholders during the project. On the other hand, projects that use predictive approach deliver the deliverables at the end, and thus the value is generated at the end of the project. Requirement solicitation and scope definition processes are also discussed in detail in this domain. Different ways in which scope is defined by both predictive and adaptive approaches are discussed in detail in this domain. For example, in predictive approaches, scope is elaborated by decomposing it into low level of details using WBS techniques. Whereas, on the other hand, in adaptive approaches, scope is defined by defining the user stories in the Agile Charter, and then the user stories are further decomposed into different functions of the project. Then we have the monitoring and evaluation performance domain that talks about assessing project performance and implementing appropriate responses to maintain performance. The focus is that right things should be measured and reported to the stakeholders. Difference between leading and lagging indicators and the concept of smart indicators are also discussed in this domain, and which were discussed in the previous version of the book as well. However, the good thing is that here it also identifies different categories of measurements. And different categories of metrics include, for example, deliverable metrics that refer to the physical attributes of the product. Then we have delivery metrics that indicate the number of items being worked on. And the idea is that the number of items in progress should be of manageable size. Then we have measures related to measuring baseline performance. For example, measuring performance against planned cost and schedule. Then we have measures related to resources. For example, measuring resource utilization against planned resource utilization. Then we have measures related to financial business value. For example, cost benefit ratio or net present value. Then the last performance domain is uncertainty performance domain. As projects are subject to high level of uncertainty in today's changing business environment, managing uncertainty has become an important aspect of project management. This domain is very similar to the risk management knowledge area of the previous version of the book. It talks about how projects respond to uncertainty while managing cost, schedule, quality, and risk elements of the project. It talks about building resilience to deal with unexpected changes in the project. It also talks about how progressive elaboration, experimentation, and prototypes help reduce ambiguities in the project. For example, in an iterative process, as more detailed planning is done, more information and more accurate estimations become available, which help reduce ambiguities in the project. Similarly, a well-designed set of experimentations can help identify cause and effect relationships, which can help reduce ambiguities in the project. Then the concepts of managing cost reserves to deal with volatile business environment are also discussed in this domain. And the risk response strategies that were discussed in the previous version of the book are also discussed here in this section. So we can say that all of the topics discussed in all of these 8 performance domains are an extension of what we studied about these topics in the 6th edition of the book. The only thing is that you will see an added focus on agile or adaptive way of managing projects in this version of the book. Then the second section of part 2 of the book is on tailoring, which talks about different factors that project teams need to understand to create a practical environment for the project. It talks about different aspects that need to be tailored. For example, selecting the right development approach for the project, adjusting processes to meet project requirements, managing engagement with stakeholders, managing responsibilities, and selecting the right project management tools. This domain talks about the tailoring work associated with all of the 8 performance domains. And it emphasizes that the project management principles form the basis for project teams' behavior while they tailor their work for each performance domain. For example, is there a collaborative team environment for the project? Does the project team have an established culture? Or how will the knowledge be managed during the execution of the project? And so on. Then the third section of part 2 of the book is about commonly used models, methods, and artifacts that are useful for managing projects. This domain presents approaches for optimizing processes and efforts. It talks about different models, for example, situational leadership model that describe ways to tailor leadership styles to meet the needs of the individuals and the project team. And within situational leadership model, then there are 2 models discussed. One is Ken Blanchard's situational leadership model that talks about measuring individuals' competence by assessing their confidence and competence levels. And it says that as individuals' competence and commitment levels evolve, leadership styles used to manage them will also evolve, from more directing style to more coaching and delegating style to meet the needs of the project. Then the second situational leadership model discussed is the Oscar coaching and mentoring model, where Oscar stands for outcomes, situations, choices, actions, and reviews. This model is used to help teams identify their goals, their current capabilities and skills, potential avenues to attain their goals, and the actions required for improvement, and then help meet them regularly to help them achieve their goals. And then this domain talks about some communication models where it is discussed that how communication medium influences the effectiveness of communication. And one of the communication models discussed is the cross-cultural communication model, which incorporates the idea that any message that is transmitted is affected by the center's current knowledge, experience, thinking, beliefs, and the communication style. And then the same applies to the person who receives the message, as they affect how he or she interprets the message. And then there are some models related to motivational factors. For example, hygiene and motivational factors, uh, intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, theory of needs, theory of X, Y, and Z, and so on. And then there are models related to managing change in organizations, which talks about how people experience and cope with change. And it also talks about different frameworks that help understand complex project environments and help make decisions to deal with complexity. And then the team development and conflict management models and the commonly used methods for data analysis and estimations are also discussed in detail in this domain. So you can see that the overall theme of this book is designed in such a way that it focuses on the critical activities, principles, models, and artifacts that, when applied in correct perspective, can greatly contribute to effective delivery of project outcomes. I hope you found this video useful, and I will see you in the next video.